This is Woman Being, and you are listening to an exclusive Season 2 bonus episode.
Bonus?
We had the opportunity to talk with Rihanna, and it was just too good to pass up until Season 3. So I'm joined with the lovely Kelly Ann and the wonderful Emma. Thanks for being here today.
Happy to be here for a special summer bonus exclusive
extravaganza.
Extravaganza.
A little extravaganza.
It's our favorite word. And we're joined here with Rihanna Teixeira. She is an author, podcaster, and content creator. She runs the Instagram account Fight for Beauty, and she's an advocate for eating disorder recovery and helping women feel comfortable in their bodies. Rihanna, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me.
It is an honor, and we will be talking about eating disorders and body image and body dysmorphia and all these things today, so stay tuned. This is Woman Being,
where we explore thoughts and opinions
and have the freedom to change our minds.
Without expectation or judgment,
we will hold a safe space and support each other
as we navigate together in the form of feminine.
So before we dive into today's topics, I just want to issue a standard trigger warning. The topic of eating disorders, body dysmorphia, body image can be very triggering for all sorts of people for all sorts of reasons. So if this isn't your episode, feel free to skip it, and we've got plenty of other content for you to listen to. Let's dive in. Rihanna, again, Thank you so much for being here. The first question, well, it's not really a question, but I would love for you to just introduce yourself, tell us about yourself and what you're doing on your platform.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm so honored and excited to be here. My name is Rihanna. I live in South Florida with my sister and her family. I have 3 nieces that I live with.
Oh,
and
cute.
I started, it's literally the best. I started my Instagram, The Fight for Beauty, in 2018 because at that point in my life, I had been about a year into recovery again. I had a really, really bad relapse into bulimia. So for a lot of my life, I struggled with eating disorders ranging from anorexia, binge eating disorder, orthorexia, and bulimia. Bulimia was always the constant eating disorder for me. Had a really bad relapse in 2017, and it ended up being one of the best things that's ever happened to me because it really helped me go on a journey of rediscovering myself, my body, food, all these toxic belief systems that I've had for so long. And so about a year into that journey, I woke up one day and it truly felt like I was being called to start sharing about my journey. The one thing that was really on my heart was I wanted to be the voice that I needed someone to be for me when I was struggling. So I started sharing just some of the things that I was learning, my journey, my process, and just trying to really go after this belief system that so many men and women in society have when it comes to food and their bodies. And it has been so much fun. I've been running the account, I said 2018. And it's really fascinating because it seems like there's always layers of beliefs that we need to uncover and detox from. And in a lot of ways, I think the account has actually helped me probably more than any other person. And it's just been so rewarding to actually see just the struggles that I went through and how it is being used to actually help other people get set free as well.
Yeah, it's amazing the stuff that you're talking about and pointing out and drawing attention to. And I feel like sometimes even just having someone say it can be so freeing, because sometimes you don't have words for what you're experiencing, but so much of it's so like implicit in so much of our culture, this diet culture and I don't know, expectations around body size and things like that.
Right. Yeah, you can't escape it. It's really hard. It's having a disordered relationship with your body and having a disordered relationship with food is the norm. And you're actually the weird one if you don't have insecurities about your body, if you don't struggle with what you should or should not eat. And so when you are a person who is in the midst of that, it's really actually hard to see that you are disordered because everybody else around you is as well, or they're celebrating your disordered behaviors, participating in them with you. And so it can be very, very confusing, especially if you have an eating disorder. I feel like the eating disorder just takes it to a whole nother level. And it's not an easy world to recover in whatsoever.
Yeah. I'm actually curious, could you, I think a lot of people tend to know the terms like binge eating or bulimia, but could you define the other term you used? I think it was orthorexia?
Orthorexia, yeah.
Orthorexia.
Orthorexia is actually a newer eating disorder that they are starting to see in treatment centers. They're getting a lot of patients that struggle with it. And orthorexia essentially is the obsession with clean living. It's important to note there's a difference between somebody who has food allergies and they need to read like food labels and that sort of thing versus a person who, like myself, wanted to eat clean with the hopes of losing weight, and it became an obsession. I went into it, I didn't have any food allergies, but as I was going through this, I started developing food allergies, and little by little, I started to restrict more and more to the point where at one point I was eating only chicken and certain vegetables, not even all vegetables. Wow. But orthorexia is really, like I said, the obsession with eating clean, having an obsession with reading food labels, refusing to eat food if it's not within what you would consider clean or good or healthy. I'm trying to think what else. It really is an obsession with trying to detoxify your body. A lot of people that are really entrenched in what we call wellness culture, it's easy for them to fall into the diagnosable disorder of orthorexia without even realizing it.
Yeah, I think it's important to hear the definition of that because that might be helpful to people to have a name to something that they might not even realize that they're going through or that they haven't really had terms for. And I can see how that would be so prevalent with the way that like Instagram, aspirational diet culture, clean eating, etc., which clean eating itself is a misnomer, is so popular. Yeah. So thanks for defining that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also like, I always say it's important to note, like, there's nothing inherently wrong with wanting to There's nothing inherently wrong with wanting to read food labels. There's nothing inherently wrong with wanting to take supplements to improve your health. But when it becomes an obsession and in something that you cannot eat something without knowing what is in it. Again, take away if you have food allergies or food sensitivities, that is a little bit different. However, that can get a little murky as well. So I just like to define, because some people hear that and they go, well, I don't have an issue. And that's not for me to decide if they have an issue. You know, there's nothing inherently wrong with those behaviors. But when it starts getting in the way of you being able to participate in life, that's when it starts to become an issue for a lot of people.
So we mentioned that this diet culture, these diet culture mentalities are so steeped across our popular culture, but they're also really prevalent in faith culture, specifically Christian communities. There's a lot of different kinds of messaging that come out of Christian communities when it comes to what you should look like, when it comes to your weight. We've talked about those some on the podcast, especially as we reviewed the HBO docuseries about Gwen Shamblin. And we've had another guest on that's talked about this a little bit, but I'm curious, as someone who is coming from a faith/church background, what role did that play in your eating disorders? And did you find positives? Did you find negatives when it came to your Christian faith as it collided with your eating disorders?
Well, I can say it was mostly negative. And as a young child, because I had an eating disorder, I didn't have the words for it at the time, but I was restricting a lot of food. I used my faith as a way to mask my eating disorder behavior. So For example, I think I was in the 7th or the 8th grade. My church was fasting leading up to Easter, and I decided to fast sugar. And I told myself, I'm doing it for Jesus. Jesus gave up his life for me, so I can give up sugar for a week. And my motivation was to lose weight. I actually didn't even know at the time I was lying to myself. I didn't realize that I was using this Christian or religious practice to hide my eating disorder behaviors. It just seemed natural to do. And again, it didn't raise any red flags for anybody around me. And then as I was growing up, it's very common to hear, honestly, fat jokes from the pastor when you're sitting in church. And sometimes they can be lighthearted, but they are, at the end of the day, mocking people who are overweight. And so we hear all these messages already from society that being overweight is bad, right? Yeah. And we hear that from jokes. So as a child, you start forming these beliefs of, I don't want to be that. I don't want people to have anything to make fun of me for. So I'm going to do everything in my power to not. Pair that with, the church using self-control as a way to encourage people to control their eating or to control their body. Yet they completely disregard self-control when it comes to men's urges, but that's a completely different podcast.
That's interesting. Yeah, we can talk about that.
But truly, in regards to that, we were in control of the men's urges, right? We had to cover up our body. So that added a whole nother shame, that added a whole nother level of shame when it came to my body, because I didn't want it to be a stumbling block, but then at the same time, you want to be attractive enough to find a spouse, right? So it was this strange tension of be ashamed of your body, but take care of your body. And by take care, stay thin is what they really mean. Yeah. And, we also hear verses talking about how, the 7 deadly sins, and one of them being gluttony. And it wasn't until a few years ago that I realized that verse actually was not talking about people who maybe binge eat ice cream every single night. That verse is actually talking about people who hoard resources and food when there are people around them that are hungry or in need. Has nothing to do with eating too much to where you have to buy a bigger pant size, Yeah. The verse, your body is a temple. Again, I can't tell you how many times I use that verse to try to encourage myself to diet and lose weight. I have been a part of church movements where we used that verse as a reason to defend why we don't eat grains, why we don't eat carbs, or why we're eliminating sugar from our diet, because my body is a temple. But that verse actually had nothing to do with our physical health. It was literally, there was a lot of context going on with that verse. It was essentially saying, don't commit sins against your own body or against somebody else's body, like sexual assault, that sort of thing. Not don't eat too much pumpkin pie at Thanksgiving. And a lot of things were just completely taken out of context. And, I think the church is also not immune to diet culture. And so the women in church and the men as well, we want to be attractive to other people. And we're told that the way to be attractive is to change our bodies and make our bodies more sexually attractive to somebody else. And so there definitely were instances that I had in the church where it was directly affecting my eating disorder and making it a lot worse. I don't know if my experience is completely normal, though, for other people who may just be church attendees or involved with their church community, only because, I co-wrote a book on healthy living with a pastor. And so going through that process of doing that, it just kind of took all those messages that are kind of already circulating in the church about bodies to a whole nother level.
Yeah, it's interesting. I keep thinking about an episode that we did in our first season where we reacted to this awful sermon of this very misogynistic pastor. And in his sermon, he talks a lot about how women need to upkeep their appearance in order to please their husband. And I'm sure like, I know that there are pressures on men to look a certain way, but I feel like there's a lot of license for men to still have, you know, a bit of a gut, or
Right.
to not necessarily have like perfect styling or whatever.
I mean, a perfect example is this pastor himself was not, you know, the slimmest Jim in all the land. You know?
And so, but like, he's telling women, like, you need to make sure that you're thin for your husband, even if he's not making sure he's thin, because it doesn't matter what he looks like. He's the husband, and you need to please him. Like, you're his object of beauty. And like, first of all, it's like this horrible double standard. Second of all, the idea that you need to upkeep some certain appearance in order to please somebody is ridiculous.
Right.
But I just keep flashing back to that because there's so many parallels in the thinking that you're talking about, and like the way that this man was preaching from the pulpit, which he got a lot of flack for doing that, and wound up like taking a sabbatical or something. I don't know where he's at now, but
Oh, poor guy.
I'm like, wow, he had a very rude awakening.
Yeah.
I don't know if he did.
Well,
but he
that's fair.
definitely got some heat.
I'm sure that social media was not kind.
No,
Oh, it wasn't.
it was
in
not.
any way.
Which, you know, the things that were said were quite vile.
Yeah.
And as we're talking about flashbacks, I myself am having flashbacks to Lent, the Lent season, when I was a kid growing up. And, you know, everyone was always talking about, what are you going to fast for Lent? And is it candy? Is it sugar? Is it all sugar? Is it including fruit? Is it TV? Like, and like, there were like unspoken levels of like, if you're super devoted, you'll give up sugar. And like, even I remember that even as like a, you know, like a 10-year-old, like it was, no one said it, but everyone knew, like, if you're really good, you'll give that up. There definitely was an aspect of like, what is this going to do to my body for good? You know what I mean? And I'm like, wow, so many weird memories just brought up.
Well, and that touches on a really important piece of the whole church and diet culture conversation, which is the idea that like holiness is somehow correlated or connected to eating and what you eat and how often and how much. And there's aspects of like, oh, well, if I have gained weight or if I'm overweight or whatever, that means that I am not, you know, I'm not connected to God, or I am like giving in to some, you know, other comfort as opposed to God himself, and I must get back on the right track. Did you feel that or experience that in your life, or have you seen other people?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it is not uncommon to see Christian, primarily female leaders who have access to organic foods. They have the financial means to live this quote unquote holistic lifestyle that they want to live. There's nothing wrong with that. But what they do is they then take their lifestyle and turn it around and sell books about holistic living, being holy. And the thing that really just makes my blood boil is a lot of the times these same women who are saying that they feel this call from God to see the church get healthy, that's great, are the same women who vote against policies that will actually give people access to healthcare, will actually give people access to more quality foods.
Yeah.
And it just, it really frustrates me, because when we take something as holy, I don't know what other word to use, but holy is holiness, something that is so sacred. And we start saying, I am this way because I eat organic apples and drink organic matcha with my organic oat milk. You know, what message is that sending to the people who are just trying to make it to their next paycheck, the moms who are skipping meals so that their child can eat food, who desperately love and want more of Jesus? And the message that it's sending is that they're not worthy, right? And like that they're not holy. They just need to have more faith. And it's like, well, no, you're actually like these people are voting against policies that will actually give people access to this kind of stuff. And then you're blaming them, saying that they need to have more faith. They need to care about their health more. And they say these quick little like gotcha lines like, well, if you don't care for your health now, you'll have to pay for the doctor later. And it's like, well, who's to even say people can afford to pay the doctor later? Like we're just trying to survive.
Yeah.
And it is a very, very interesting thing. And it's something that I've had to untangle in myself, honestly, because I had the belief that people who were thin were more successful. They were more holy. They were more driven or had more self-control than maybe I had. And that's something that I really had to work on dismantling this fat phobia that I had within myself that I was unknowingly projecting onto other people, which was also affecting how I viewed myself and how I viewed others when it came to bodies and body sizes.
I feel like it's so beneficial to point out that disconnect between like the way that a lot of Christian leaders talk about, you know, health or even just like caring for people in general, and then the way that they wind up then voting or the sort of politics they support they're not congruent with one another.
Right.
And it's frustrating because I think there's often the argument of like, well, like the church should be providing these things, not the government.
But are they?
But the church isn't. The church is buying multi-million-dollar buildings and the church is having big worship events and churches are doing all sorts. There's lots of churches that are doing really great things for their communities, but there's millions and millions of dollars that go into things that are actually not necessarily benefiting communities, that are not feeding the hungry, that are not giving resources to widows and to orphans. Like, so if the church, the evangelical church in the United States has so many resources at large and they're not utilizing them for those things. So somebody needs to do it, and they won't vote for the government to do it either.
Right. Well, they utilize the money, you know, they do those things just enough to where they can kind of get by without being blamed for not doing those things, right? So it's like they maybe do like a pancake breakfast or something for the homeless, or, you know, they take donations, but it's exactly like what you said. It's like, well, we could probably be doing a lot more if we're not spending our time, money, and resources on fundraising for a bigger church building, you know?
For sure.
And if you parse out the percentages of where the funding goes, like the pancake breakfast costs them, you know, like a point of a percentage of what, you know, the new soundstage costs.
Yeah. And meanwhile,
100%.
they're charging $400 a ticket for a 3-day worship event or whatever. And I'm like,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually the same thing that like big oil and gas companies do when they talk about how they have environmental initiatives to combat climate change, and they're spending like 0.01% of their billion-dollar profits on environmental impact and actually trying to cancel out some of the damage they're doing. But they're still producing tons and tons of oil and still, like, you know, like, so it's this idea of like, oh yeah, we're doing something good. Look at our initiative. Look at our, like, you know, little ticket and little flag in our cap, but feather in our cap? There's no flags in the cap. It's feathers in your cap.
Well, you know what? These days, there are some pastors that might have a certain flag in their cap.
That's true. That is true.
We're not going to say which,
that's some tea.
Think about that.
But yeah, it's so true. And it's like, it just, and it's interesting because I was so blind to that myself, you know, and I'm someone that I always quote unquote valued health, you know, I didn't fully understand what that meant, but I would have been the first to defend what the church does. And I would have been the first to defend why a pastor drives a Ferrari when there's, you know, women in their
He needs
congregation.
The Ferrari to help the poor.
It was the Lord bless them and its favor. Yeah. And I think as I've been deconstructing, you know, my deconstruction journey started with food and my body, and it's kind of just started to bleed over into other areas of my life. But as I've been just deconstructing what my relationship with the church was, it convicted me, honestly. And I'm not here to point fingers, because all the people that I'm talking about, like, they do this, they vote against this, like, that was me at one point. I had no I had no idea that there was another option. I didn't know that I could vote differently and still love Jesus and be a Christian, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's hard for people to challenge those things. But at the end of the day, like, don't tell me you care about health if you don't want people to have access to healthcare. Like, plain, that's just like as basic as it gets, you know? And actually, if you take a look at what determines a person's health, food and exercise are only 2 of 108 other things that go into what makes a person healthy.
It's true.
So, you know, things like genetics, things like access to education, access to healthcare, access to organic, nutrient-dense foods, access to whatever it is. But what determines a person's body size and what determines a person's health actually has very little to do with if they work out and what they're consuming. There's so many more elements that go into it. But if you are genetically thin, it's going to be really easy, you know, to praise yourself saying, oh, it's because I eat healthy and I work out. It's going to be really hard to feel great about yourself if you're going to be real honest about why you're able to live the lifestyle that you're able to live and why others can't.
One thing that I do want to bring up, since we've like talked about it a little bit when it comes to like faith and eating disorders and just diet culture in general intersecting, and I might be in the minority with this, but I do think that there can be benefits to something like fasting spiritually. I think that there are ways that people gain from that, because I don't know, I like, at least when I was in the church in high school, I never received negative messaging that was around my body when it came to fasting and to that kind of thing. So I guess I just want to point that out. Like, I've never heard people talk about it in the frame of wanting to lose weight until I've talked to you guys about it. So it's something that, and I think people do it across religions and and whether it's fasting from food or fasting from something else, I think that there's a lot of ways that it can interplay into like toxic thinking. And like, if people are like wrestling with an eating disorder, like I can definitely see how fasting could like play into that and like then amplify it. But I also, I guess I'm just in the camp of, I don't want to like throw the baby out with the bathwater, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Well, it comes back to intention, right? With everything. And so there are plenty of people out there that fast from food and fast from water. There's a variety of different religions, and it does have a great effect on their spiritual life. I think, it comes back to intention. For me, I can't say that I ever fasted from food without having an underlying desire that it would, like the hope that it would change my body. But I also can't speak for everybody. So I have had people reach out and ask me like, you know, this is coming up or this holiday is coming up and I'm not quite sure what to do. And I can never speak into like what God is telling somebody else to do, but I can speak from my own experience. And from my own experience, I can say that I worked so hard to get to the place that I am with food and my body. And for me, the Jesus that I know and that I'm in relationship with, he saw all of that, you know, and he doesn't want me to sacrifice my mental health and all the work that we did together, truly, just to be closer to him. And again, this is just my experience. So for me with fasting, you know, I fast social media, which honestly for me is probably a lot harder than fasting food. Or I just find other things to fast. One time I fasted like exercise. But I think you're absolutely right. It comes back down to intention. It comes back down to if you are somebody that has had a traumatic, you know, past relationship with food, it's definitely worth checking in with yourself, being really honest with yourself about why you're actually doing this, and making sure you have a support system if you do decide to, you know, you are going to fast food, you are going to fast water, whatever it is. But having people there to support you who can maybe point out if they're seeing something dangerous coming about.
For sure. And I think that at the end of the day, like, for example, if you're Muslim and you abstain from Ramadan because it's going to be triggering for you, or because it's going to bring up like these this toxic past for you, then like, I think that doesn't make you, a bad Muslim at the end of the day.
Right,
and like, I
right.
think that your spiritual practices should be in line with what's also going to be the healthiest and like most
Right.
like thriveful thing for you.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I just want to put out there that it is an option, but also like, intentionality, doing things safely, doing
Right.
things in a way
Yeah.
that's not going to be harmful to you is super important.
Right.
But I do want to bring up also, we're talking about, all the ways that within a church culture, within Christian faith, that people receive shame and frankly, like discrimination because of what their bodies look like, because of a perception of what their health must be, because of the way their body looks. And I'm curious to hear from you how that same discrimination against different body types, different body sizes, also intersects with things like race or sex and other forms of oppression. It's impossible for these things to not overlap. So
yeah, absolutely. And I love talking about this. For anyone listening that wants to learn more, I would highly recommend a book by Sabrina Strings. It's called Fearing the Black Body, and it is such an amazing resource, but she actually breaks down, and there's other resources. It's not just, I'm getting all my information from one book, but if you take a look at the history of the human body, women's bodies, the ideal woman's body changes constantly. Right now we're very into like the curves and the big butt and the hips and everything. But when I was in high school, it had nothing to do with that. It was all about being as thin, as like stick looking as possible.
yeah.
And when you start going through and taking a look at what bodies were considered ideal at certain periods in time, you will start to see, when you start getting back to when white people came to America and they forced people into slavery, what they wanted to do was they wanted to steer women away from looking like the Black body. And this is going to be like a sweeping stereotype, but Black bodies do tend to have more curves, which is, exactly what we're seeing right now. And so fashion designers were trying to steer people away from wanting to look like the Black body, because Black bodies were seen as lazy. They were seen as poor, all the awful, horrific things that they were wanting us to associate with Black people. In fact, there was a Black woman who was kidnapped from her home in Africa and brought over to the States. And she was actually used as a spectacle, like a freak show type of thing, because she had a big butt. And they would travel with her. People would pay money to come and see her. Now, fast forward centuries later, and now white people are paying money to look like her. And so what has happened, and also like even just medically, if you take a look at the history of the body mass index, the BMI, it was originally called Quetelet's index. It was created by a man named Adolf Quetelet, and he was an astronomer, and he wanted to create what he believed was the ideal man. So he was doing research over different people groups and over different demographics, and kind of picking and choosing what he liked most about those to create this standard of what would be ideal for people to look and act like. It was never supposed to be a measure of health. And so he actually co-founded a school that went on to promote the message that Black people were of a different species. And they used the Quetelet's index to try to prove these racist points to people. Fast forward to, 50 or so years later, and insurance companies are now starting to become a thing, and they want to be able to have a metric system to determine whether they should or should not offer life insurance or cover, different policies for people. And they didn't have that. So Ansel Keys, he was also a researcher. He said, well, let's take Quiddeley's index and let's put it to the test. So they went off, they pulled only men for these studies. There was not a single female used, and it was primarily men from white European countries. They did take men from Japan, and then they also did take men from, I think it was Bantu men, Black men from Africa. And as they're going through these studies, you can actually go back and look, and it says in the notes that everything that they're finding, none of it applied to the Black men.
Wow.
But they still gave this back to the insurance companies. Insurance companies, they liked what they saw, and then they started using it. What then happened was Black people were unable to get insurance because they were being deemed as quote unquote unhealthy or at risk. On the flip side, it actually has done a lot of harm to the Asian community because it under-exaggerated their risks. And so because they are of a certain size, the thin ideal, a lot of the times they also don't get quality medical care because since they're thin, doctors assume, oh, you're healthy, you're fine. And so a lot of their symptoms and complaints will go undiagnosed. They won't dive in deeper to try to see what is going on. And so truly the only people group that the BMI is helpful for, and I say helpful like very loosely, I wouldn't even necessarily say it's helpful.
Yeah.
It's for white men. Like women were not even included in these studies. We have absolutely no studies on what determines we have no studies like the BMI, like one system. So what determines whether a woman is healthy or not. And so the standards that even a lot of our doctors use are rooted in sexism and racism. And it's unfortunately gotten in the way of people being able to get adequate health care.
Dang.
That sucks.
Yeah. And I do think we are moving in a direction, like we have so far to go, but more and more people are starting to realize like, hey, the BMI is actually crap. And I don't know if you guys saw this, but I saw it because it's, prevalent in the community that I'm a part of. But even Grey's Anatomy actually recently kind of took a dig at the BMI and talked about how it was rooted in racism and how we shouldn't use it to determine health anymore. So that was a cool moment for a lot of people that have been trying to fight against this. And I didn't even get into how they lowered the numbers while they were implementing it into the healthcare system. And they lowered them twice, actually. They lowered them the first time. And then in 1998, millions of Americans suddenly became overweight or obese because overnight they decided to change the standards yet again because they were receiving pressure from a pharmaceutical company that was funding them that were about to release the only 2 weight loss drugs on the market. So you can convince people that they are at risk of being sick. You can convince them to pay you for the solution. So there's just so many things wrong with the way we measure health when it comes to utilizing things like the BMI.
Yeah, I remember in high school in PE class, part of our grade was determined by what our BMI score was. We that helped determine like what our grade wound up being in PE class, and it's like the fact that would even factor in is wild because it's already a corrupt system on one hand, but also the fact that would determine like whether you did well in PE class is also horrible. It is.
It's awful. Yeah, you literally just unlocked a memory for me because I remember doing that too, and I have not thought about that since that happened. Yeah. So thank you for that. But it's true. It's like and like you're giving it to like you're in high school, you're teenagers, like our bodies were changing like at a pace that a lot of us, we didn't know what to do with ourselves. And it's like, especially as women, men go through their own changes, but as women, like we are growing, our body is getting more body fat. Our body is growing boobs and hips, and it can be a really hard thing for a young girl to manage. And then you take a BMI that is not even accurate and it's telling you you're quote unquote overweight or you're quote unquote obese, that can be really detrimental for somebody who is already struggling with their changing body.
For sure.
No, yeah, it actually, in preparation for this episode and out of curiosity, I actually looked up my ideal body weight the other day, and I am 5'2", so I'm pretty short. And they said my ideal body weight is 96 pounds.
What?
Oh, wow.
So there's a scale, right? It's 96 pounds to, I think, 128 pounds. And I'm like, the last time I was 128 pounds, like I was like nothing. Like
Right.
It was not good. I looked fairly gaunt.
So, and then imagine at 96.
96 pounds.
Oh,
I haven't
gosh.
been 96 pounds since I was like 10.
Yeah.
And so it just showed me like, oh man, like, and as like I have been on a health journey for about 1.5 years now, and I have fluctuated a lot in weight. And for me personally, people tend to say like, oh, you look so good. And I'm like, oh, interesting. Because actually I'm pretty sick right now. Like, and I've lost weight because I actually need medical help with some things. And you go into the doctor and the doctor's like, oh no, you don't have a hormone imbalance. You're young and healthy. Look at you. And I'm like,
Right.
actually, I think it is my hormones. I'm actually going to need to go to a different doctor to get medical help because of this association with weight and health. And it's very fascinating to hear you talk about like that, and then like the role genetics plays in it. It's all just a mess.
Yeah.
It's so messy.
Yeah. And then
So messy.
at the same time, you have like popular culture with things. I keep thinking about the show The Biggest Loser was so popular in the like 2000s, 2010s. And like, it's a show that's all based around making people lose weight in this really extreme way in order to win money. Like, how toxic.
Right.
Yeah,
Not
as quickly as
good.
possible. Don't like actually form like healthy habits. Like, don't like just lose weight, period. And like, even just the title is so demeaning. The Biggest Loser
Totally.
is implying, like, playing on the idea that people who are fat are losers and are like in some way like uncool, like some other like lower level, lower echelon of society, and also playing on like the fact that they need to lose weight. And it's ridiculous that we as a society would even find something like that entertaining. Like, it's kind of sick.
Right.
Yeah.
It is. And it just goes to show how much society dehumanizes fat people. You know, when America every Monday night was sitting down to literally get entertainment from watching fat people be abused, being forced to work out until they have to throw up on very, very minimal calories, watching fat people get yelled at by these super thin trainers. And that was entertainment for society. And if you look at it, if you go back and try to follow any of these people that were on the show, they ended up like gaining the weight back. Some of them gained more back, but it was it wasn't maintainable. And that is proof right there that what they were doing was not for health. They were doing it because America just needed a new pastime. You know, we just needed something to look at, to feel better about ourselves. And unfortunately, in society, that is fat people. That's why fat characters on TV, you know, like Fat Amy, for example, from Pitch Perfect. She's funny because the joke is that she's confident when she shouldn't be confident because she's fat. That's her entire character. And you would never see a thin person playing that character. You just wouldn't, because you would be like, oh yeah, you're confident, you should be. And so it's like, we have taken fat people and created them into becoming this joke, truly, for us to feel better about ourselves.
Yeah.
Damn. Like,
yeah. Well, and I'm pretty sure that Rebel Wilson, who plays Fat Amy, got it was such a huge thing in media when she lost a bunch of weight. And like, there was, I'm pretty sure that she got flack that she had maybe done it in the wrong way or whatever. But like, she talked about how she was just, you know, trying to be healthy and just, you know,
no, totally
living her life. And the fact that her weight is even a discussion is like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, people are still obsessed with it.
Yeah.
With
or
her
like when
and her
Adele
journey.
lost weight too, people freaked out. Like people get so invested in what like these celebrities look like.
And Adele was going through a horrific divorce. It's like, and people are like, oh my gosh, you look amazing. And I don't know what Adele did to lose the weight. I don't know if she's feeling better, if it was because she was going through something super stressful, but it just really creates an unhealthy way for people to feel a lot of shame if they were to gain the weight back, and it just like, my thing is, I'm like, why are we still complimenting weight loss? Which I feel like, to me, it's so confusing, but I have to remind myself I have been immersed in the anti-diet world for almost 4 years now. So that's just not something I do. That's not something the people that I follow do. So when I go out into the world and people are just so quick to be like complimenting weight loss and giving weight loss advice, I'm like, oh my gosh, how is this happening? Like, it's 2022. Stop talking about people's bodies,
Yeah.
But it is, it's still so, it's like you said, like, I couldn't tell you any recent Rebel Wilson movies, if there have been any recent ones or the last one she was in, but I could tell you that she lost weight because that's what all the coverage is talking about.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. I'm realizing the same thing for Melissa McCarthy. She's like one of my favorite actors, comedians, writers.
She's hilarious.
She's so funny. But if you look at like her early days, all of her characters were in that vein that you were saying. Like, it was funny because she was confident, and she shouldn't be because she's larger than we as society think she should be. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, that's so sad. And I'm like, she's like, people that are larger are so limited in the types of roles that they can or can't play because of this. And it's like, oh man, you kind of have to be like one type of actor or one type of comedian. And I'm like, that sucks.
Yeah. Well, if you look at how fat people are represented in the media, it's going to be really hard to try to name a movie where a fat female is the leading role where the topic isn't her weight, and a lot of the people in these movies who are not within the ideal body type, they're always going to be the quirky, goofy best friend, or the villain. It's very rare. And it's like, and what happens is, I have a post that sometimes I'll put up on my Instagram talking about how growing up as toddlers, we were exposed to weight discrimination. If you take a look at children's movies, all the princesses have, amazing hair that I will literally never have in my life. And that makes me so angry. But they have these super thin waists. They're very, very thin. They win the attention of the prince. And the fat characters are generally evil. So we have people like Ursula, or we have goofy people like the best friend, the bear, and like Robin Hood. I don't even remember his name, but
Little John.
Little John. Yes, thank you. But
who's not children, little, haha, so funny. Like it's literally.
Yeah. And even like if you watch Peter Pan, like I was watching Peter Pan a few years ago, and there's a scene where Tinkerbell is flying and she stands on a mirror and she starts looking at her hips, and you can tell she's like really upset about the shape of her hips. And I was watching it and I'm like, oh my gosh, like as a child, I was watching it and I'm taking in these messages like, oh, you don't want big hips because look, Tinkerbell is upset. And the princes, they all go for the princesses who are beautiful and who are thin. And it's like, it feels like I could be reaching, but I really don't think that I am, because we don't have words to communicate what we're seeing necessarily. And we don't always understand the messages that are coming in. But when you see something done repetitively, movie after movie after movie, you're going to start putting two and two together when it comes to, oh, you're supposed to look this way if you want to win this person. And it starts from when we're toddlers,
Yeah. One of the things that I think is really cool and maybe good is that we are seeing like more inclusive characters in those like animated shows or movies for children. While I can't think, at least off the top of my head, of an example of a like a princess type character who's fat, I do think about how in the movie Encanto that just came out, the fact that the main character Mirabel has glasses is like incredible, because it is showing a main character who's not seen as like incapable or something, or like just intellectual, which like a glasses wearing character in a cartoon is often associated with. You're seeing a princess who also has glasses, whereas women a lot of times are told like, oh, like you shouldn't wear glasses on your wedding day because it'll look bad, it'll cover up your makeup, or like you shouldn't wear glasses XYZ, like because it's not as attractive, and that they're not for like formal events or things like that. And so I saw a really cool video that was like a little girl who was like crying because she was so excited to see Mirabel on the screen because Mirabel had glasses like her. Or seeing more and more Disney princesses that are of different races, that aren't just these like white girls that from Europe somewhere. But, you know, seeing characters like Mirabel or Moana or Raya or whatever. Tiana. That's a good one. So I think we're moving towards more inclusivity, but like getting to see characters that actually look like you is so important for children. And the messages that you get are ridiculous. Like I've watched kids of other races say things like, oh, I wish that I looked like Elsa, you know, because Elsa is white and has blonde hair and like she's so beautiful. And I love Frozen, but like also if we had wider representation, then like maybe they would feel more empowered to like embrace the beauty that they already have within their race, you know?
And the fact that children are even feeling that way to begin with is heartbreaking in and of itself, you know? And Elsa does represent the ideal look, the ideal body, the ideal voice, the ideal power just to ice people out. And, you know, it's interesting because I'm white, and for me as a child, I didn't ever have to look for somebody to represent me. It was just always there for me. And it wasn't until I was older and started like listening to voices that were Black or Hispanic or whatever, and realizing like, oh, you're right. You know, we are, you guys don't have any representation. And we are moving towards a place where we're starting to see that more, which is great. But I think it's also, you know, from what I can tell, I can't speak for them, but from what I'm hearing, it's like, yes, they want the representation, but they also really want the equality. You know, representation means nothing if there's still, you know, systemic processes that are getting in the way of them being able to live a full life that humans just have the right to live, you know?
For sure.
Yeah. So, man, so many good things. And this kind of feeds into everything we've been talking about, but it's slightly a shift. But where do you stand on body positivity versus body neutrality? Like, that's like a whole big conversation right now. And I feel like it also feeds into, like, there's like this weird balance right now, right? Of like, we went through a phase where it was like, oh, I don't see color. But then it's like, wait, if you don't see color, you're missing all of the beauty and diversity in the world. And so I'm curious what your take is on the like neutrality conversation.
Yeah. Well, I always start off saying that body positivity is likely not what you think it is. And I'm not speaking to you directly. I'm just saying as an audience. So body positivity, the way it is presented in media now is that it's all about embracing your body, feeling good in your body, no matter the size. And that's actually not what body positivity as a movement is or how it was started. So the body positivity movement was started primarily by Black queer females, because they wanted to, it was a social justice movement. They wanted to have equal access to healthcare. They wanted to not be discriminated against because of their body type. So they were really advocating for equal access for Black people, disabled people, queer people. And this was, I believe, before or during when the AIDS crisis was going on. So there were a lot of different groups of people that were being discriminated against. So what has happened, though, is it was a social justice movement, and it was supposed to be a safe space for all of these people to really connect and be themselves and vocalize what they're going through. With the rise of social media, what started happening was white, thin females started catching on to it and started posting as if it was their movement. And so what that has done, unfortunately, is it has taken the very people that the movement was created for and made them the minority within their own movement, to the point where people don't even understand what body positivity is. So I always try to be very clear, because people will say like, oh, like she runs a body positive account. And I'm like, no, I don't run a body positive account. I'm a body positive ally, but that movement is not for me. That's not to say that, and that's not just discrediting the body image issues that other people go through whatsoever. So the body liberation movement, from what I understand, did you say liberation or neutrality? I'm sorry.
Neutrality, but totally touch on liberation as well. If that's,
we want to hear about all the movements.
Yeah, tell us.
Okay. Okay. So the body liberation movement is actually essentially the same, but they're trying to take it back in a sense. So because body positivity just got associated with, things like Dove campaigns, where again, it's a lineup of primarily thin white women, and there might be one plus size person, there might be one Black person just to hit the diversity quota, because it was overtaken. These people then created the body liberation movement, which again is advocating for social justice for people that are experiencing discrimination in society, discrimination in the workplace, discrimination in healthcare because of their appearance. Body neutrality I love body neutrality in my approach to like healing my relationship with food and my body. So body neutrality is essentially taking the power away from having to feel a certain way about your body. So when you're entrenched in diet culture, or when you have a really negative relationship with your body, you hate it, right? And so, and then you're in this place and you're like, I don't want to feel this way anymore. I want to love my body. And so you start being like, no, I love myself. I love my body. But what happens is now we're taking body love and we're making that a very unrealistic expectation as well. Because the reality is bodies are weird. We're going to have days where we are not going to like the way that we look. We're going to have days where we're bloated. We're going to have days where we don't feel well. We're going to have days where our bodies just aren't operating the way that we're used to them operating, or the way that we want them to operate. And what happens is when you're on this journey of like, I just need to love myself, we kind of paint this picture of like, I'm just going to wake up and I'm going to be like Cinderella, and these like bluebirds are going to fly down and braid my hair, and I'm just going to like sing love songs to myself in the mirror. And that's never going to happen, no matter how many affirmations you do.
Yeah.
But what we can do is when we have those days where we're just not liking what we see in the mirror, body neutrality gives you permission to feel that way. It validates those feelings while also saying, this does not determine your worth though. So it was really helpful for me, especially when I started recovery, because my weight was fluctuating so much from dieting. And then when I started the practice of intuitive eating, I did gain weight because my body was trying to heal and adjust. And so it gave me permission to not feel guilty for not liking my body, because I think a lot of people feel shame when they're on that journey, that they're not in this great place. It gave me permission to actually be able to say like, yeah, I feel very uncomfortable in my body right now. My clothes are tight. I don't feel great. I don't think I look great, but I still am allowed to show up as I am. Like, I have a right to exist in this body right now. And so it also, on the flip side, it also challenges you to not get attached to your bodies, because it feels good, right? When people come up to you for the most part and they're like, oh my gosh, you look like you lost weight, because we've been conditioned to believe that weight loss is like the best thing that a person can achieve. You think like, oh my gosh, thank you. And it like lifts your spirits for a lot of people. This maybe not for everybody. And so I actually had to challenge that in myself as I was going on my journey. My body did start naturally losing weight, mostly based off of my genetics. I was healing my relationship with food. And I had to like really be intentional about not letting those comments excite me, because I just did not want to get attached to my body looking a certain way or attached to compliments, because what happens if I stop getting those compliments? I'm going to start wondering like, oh crap, did I gain the weight back? And so body neutrality is really giving people permission to exist in the body that they have, while also realizing that their body essentially does not have value when it comes to who they are and who they can show up as every day in their life.
Yeah, I really like the way you explained that, because I think the way I have maybe heard or experienced other people experiencing body neutrality is more of like a disassociation from the body, of like, I'm not acknowledging the good or the bad, I'm just existing. And I was like, oh, like actually I want to be present with my body through the ups, the downs, the in-betweens. And I think that presentness is really important in being in touch with your humanity in general.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think too, it's like, it's okay to feel good about your body. You know what I mean? Like if I like have a really great workout, like my body feels really good and I want to feel that. And then there's going to be days where I maybe eat something that doesn't make me feel awesome. And that's okay to feel that way, and it's like, the disassociating, I think, can be, everybody's different. But for me, I think that could be kind of a dangerous path for me to go down, because I'm already prone to disassociating in general. So it's like, I need to be present. I kind of want to know what it's like to be me,
Well, I also love the distinction you made about what the body positivity movement started as, and the now fat liberation movement or body liberation movement, and what that means, because I think oftentimes, you mentioned like the Dove campaigns and things like that. So much of body image conversations are around how you feel. And like, oh, we want people to feel good in their bodies, or we want people to accept themselves, which super important things. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But like pointing out maybe even deeper issues where like we want people to have access to healthcare, and we want people to not be discriminated against based on their body type and or their skin color or whatever. And I think like those pieces are so fundamental, and like as far as activism is concerned, so much more important in our world today than like helping more white women feel more good about whatever weight they're at, And so I love the expansiveness of that conversation. And that feels like so much more of a proactive and beneficial thing to ally with than necessarily being concerned about whether someone feels good about themselves on a given day.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's like, we all want everyone to feel great about themselves. But the reality is, people who are fat are going to the doctor complaining of, whatever condition that they're experiencing, symptoms, and they're not even getting an actual doctor's visit, because the doctor is saying you just need to lose weight and then come back and see me. And if you actually start researching, you'll see, and a lot of the times when people are trying to fight against the fat acceptance movement, they say like, but there's higher like mortality rates the higher you get. They're not taking into consideration that fat people can't even get like quality care. It's so hard for them. And so they are going in with symptoms saying like, hey, I heard this story on a podcast, like, hey, I don't feel well. Something is not right. And the doctor's like, go home and lose weight, go home and lose weight. Well, it ends up she had a giant tumor in her stomach and it almost killed her. And if it had killed her, the thing is, people would have said it was because she was fat. Not because she had a tumor that a doctor was not wanting to actually investigate. And so there's so many different factors that go into like how is a person going to feel good about their body if a doctor is not believing them because they look a certain way? It's not going to be possible.
Right. And that actually brings up a great point that kind of leads into my next question is, I know I've grown up with like an inundation of that kind of thinking. Like obesity leads towards all sorts of health conditions that are super problematic, et cetera. And I think my question is, how do we as a society balance what the science is supposedly pointing to with encouraging holistic health? Like, it seems like there's this like obsession with like being healthy, and that obesity can be a sign of unhealth. But at the end of the day, like, how do we continue to fight for rights and, good healthcare for people who are obese, but also like balance what the science is saying as far as health is concerned?
So the first thing to consider is there actually is not a single disease that is directly related only to fat people. There's just not. People get diseases no matter what size they are. The difference is if a thin person gets diagnosed with cancer, that's a tragedy. If a fat person gets diagnosed with cancer, then they brought that upon themselves. They need to change their lifestyle. They need to do this. So when you actually take a look at all the different diseases, we know that people of any size can get them, right? And that we need to shift away from the fat person did this to themselves, because if a thin person, and a lot of us know of people who lived very, very healthy lifestyles where they got cancer or they got some sort of that heart attack, something happened to them. And nobody's blaming that person. They're all having sympathy, saying, wow, they really tried. But if it happens to a fat person, it's easy to just say, oh, well, they ate too much, they didn't exercise, but really they have no idea what their day-to-day life looked like. So there's that. Also,
yeah, we saw that, especially in the pandemic, a lot.
Yeah.
It's like people who were overweight were just sort of like, well, they were overweight. So
right. Yeah. Totally. The other thing to consider is we don't dehumanize people just because of their health status. So a lot of people will say like, well, it's their fault. Like, why do my tax dollars have to go towards somebody who won't take care of themselves, who won't eat healthy, who won't exercise? Again, these are all generalizations that they're making, because the reality is, I would say 99%, if not 100% of fat people know how to diet and know what to eat. They know, it's not a secret that people think that they just need to eat less and exercise more. So the thing is, though, is that nobody owes us health as a society. It is not my right to infringe on another person's right and say, your body makes me uncomfortable, therefore I don't want you to have access to healthcare, or therefore I don't want you to have representation in the media. Because we also know a lot of thin people that lead very unhealthy lifestyles as well. Yeah. Yet people are not upset with those people. If anything, people want to be those people. Like I can't tell you when I know somebody who can eat fast food and never works out and they have this ideal body, people don't say, oh, wow, you really need to start taking your health seriously. Some people might, but the majority's not. The majority is going to say like, oh my gosh, you're so lucky. I wish that could be me. So it goes back into like, they don't actually care about health. They care about aesthetics. And those are two very different things.
For sure.
But also we need to take a look at and see that the more diet culture has grown, it's a $78 billion industry, the more people have gained weight. And because dieting is the number one predictor of weight gain. And people always think that they're going to be the exception. And they think, no, not me. I'm going to take this seriously. But the reality is that 95% of the people will gain the weight back. And then some of them will gain the weight back even more. And so it comes back down to that should be a sign to us that there's more to health than what people are just eating and doing. And, there isn't a clear-cut answer. There's going to be, there's systemic issues that we need to really address, making sure people have access to healthcare. We do need to reevaluate our relationship with food. A lot of people need to do that, but also like mental health plays such a huge role into a lot of these issues. So people, and let's be honest, like things like therapy are a luxury. It's not just considered a luxury. It is a luxury. It's not something many people have access to. And so I think there's not like one straight answer, like we need to do this and we need to do that. The thing that we can do is health looks different for everybody. And if we create a world in where fat people can go to a gym without fearing being recorded and mocked on social media, where we don't take fat people exercising on TV and use it for entertainment, we don't make fat people the butt of the joke, then maybe we would see some sort of shift in people's relationships with food and their body overall. And people would actually feel a lot more safer to dive into what health would look like for them. But it's just not a safe world for a lot of people to be able to do that.
Yeah. I mean, as you talk about all that, I think about how like I was one of those people in high school who like, I ate McDonald's like all the time. I did not eat well. I was very unhealthy and ate fast food very regularly and was super skinny because that's just my body type. And I was receiving messages from my doctor that I'm like underweight, that I need to gain more weight, that my doctor didn't actually tell me to eat healthier, which is I think part of all of this is that they didn't really care that I was eating fast food all the time. But I was being told by my peers, like, oh my gosh, you're so skinny, like you look so great. And then I was also being told by my peers, oh, you look anorexic or like you look unhealthy. And like, I think some of that is like the malicious like jealousy that people will get because like that body is so glorified.
Right.
But it was so many mixed messages for a young person to be receiving all at once. And none of it was actually like beneficial to my health and like wasn't really concerned with my health.
Right.
And because my doctor was looking at my BMI and saying, oh, you're underweight. And so you need to gain more weight. But like also, why did I need to gain more weight? And then like going into college, I did gain more weight because that's what happens when you go to college, basically.
Yeah. And you actually bring up a really great point where you said you were underweight and your doctor's like, hey, you need to gain weight. The thing that's interesting about the outrage that people experience towards fat people existing truly is that it's actually more dangerous for the majority of people, not everybody, to be underweight than it is to be overweight. And people in the overweight category, if you look at it on the BMI, live the longest. They do. They live longer than people in the underweight. They live longer than people in the quote unquote healthy range. And so it goes back to, it's like, okay, so we're concerned about health. But really, are we actually concerned about health, or we just don't want fat people around anymore? Because if we were concerned about health, we would also be fighting against having underweight people, if that makes sense. It comes back down to like, you don't know somebody's health status based off looking at their body.
Yeah. I even remember I had a friend in high school who was much more underweight than I was. And she started drinking like Pediasures to like help her gain weight. Because I think her doctor told her to, or her parents or someone. And so she would drink these Pediasures, and we all thought that it was like funny that she was doing that. And but it was never seen as like, oh, like you genuinely need to like gain weight because could be like unsafe or unhealthy for you that you are so thin. And like she ate, like she wasn't someone, at least as far as I know, who like was struggling with any sort of eating disorders or anything like that. She just was a very, very skinny person. And so but it wasn't seen as, I think, as big of a deal as someone like going on a diet who's overweight. But it was like, oh, haha, you're drinking Pediasures because you need to gain weight. But it's not a big deal when actually
it's like
it is a big health risk. Yeah, exactly. And like, it's also cute and quirky for like a a super skinny person to like down a ton of French fries or whatever and
Oh,
like
yeah.
not gain weight. Like it's like that is admirable, which you already touched on that, but it's
Yeah.
such a weird paradox. Like why is that even celebrated?
Yeah. And if the fat person were to do the exact same thing, people would
Yeah.
be losing their
Absolutely.
minds.
Exactly.
You know, and it's like pick one. You either care about health or you just don't like fat people. I'm pretty sure it's the latter, you know?
Mhm.
So
Well, and I was just going to say that kind of circles back to the BMI and that it's flawed. I never grew up with an understanding of the BMI as something that was like an accurate measure. Like I think it was always presented to me as like, this is a rough estimate. It's probably off. So like, don't use this as Bible truth, but it's a point of reference for you. So I never felt like super traumatized by the BMI. I also was like generally considered in the healthy weight or underweight category. But part of that, I feel like there's so many girls my age who are in the same boat. And I feel like in some ways, like there's tons of girls that grow up a certain way. And then when their, hormones kick in and they settle in and their boobs fill out and their hips grow or whatever, it changes. And so I feel like a lot of those measurements don't really take into account like the growing process and like the fact that I was 5'9" in 7th grade and like had grown a ton. And so all of my energy was like being pushed towards going up and not necessarily out. And so I think that like that sort of just points to the fact that the BMI, I mean, obviously its roots very not good, very racist, very sexist, but just the idea of like a measure being considered like healthy or unhealthy. I don't know, like is healthy a bad word? Because it almost feels like this like unreachable sort of ethereal thing that requires you to be skinny, but also like heavy enough. And then, like, I don't know, like it's very arbitrary and it doesn't actually matter what you eat or whatever, as long as you're within this like look.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I was actually on a friend's podcast earlier this week and he was asking me about, what I do. And, he had said he's like, how does that work? He's like, and he was genuinely curious. He's like, because we do want to like feel good. Like when you stop dieting, like what happens? And I'm like, well, that's the thing right there. Like when you hear the word healthy, you just assume that means you diet. And it's like, I walked away from dieting. I didn't walk away from health. And those are two very different things. And they look very different depending on the person. For some people, eating a can of green beans is the healthiest option for them. For another person, it's going to be organic green beans. For some families, eating McDonald's is the healthiest option, getting something off the dollar menu because they don't actually have the means to buy anything else. And so, Mick Jr., I don't even know what they serve there. I always just get the double cheeseburger meal. That's my favorite. So, eating a burger off the dollar menu, that's going to be the healthiest option for their family. Otherwise, they're just not going to eat, then we're going to sit here and say we care about health, but a family is going hungry. Yeah. And that's kind of why I get really passionate about people who get on their high horse when it comes to processed foods, because the reality is processed foods have changed people's lives for the better. It's wild to think that there is a child eating top ramen that was created years and years and years ago, and it is now giving them life today. Whereas that child may not be alive if they didn't have access to processed foods, which made it more accessible for people to eat. And I'm not saying I mean, people can choose however they want to eat. Like if you want to live a life where you eat foods that are less processed, because literally everything is processed, or have less ingredients in it, that is completely there's no wrong in that. But I get really frustrated when people demonize processed foods, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I just think about the single mom that's trying to do what she can to feed her family. And it's she's on TikTok or Instagram following someone who's, I mean, you can't eat anything these days. The people that are really into clean eating, it's they take something like an RX bar, which already tastes like cardboard to me. It's like cardboard with a hint of blueberry.
They're so
gross. You said it.
Yeah. And it's and they're saying this is bad for you because it has this ingredient. And it's well, then what the heck are people supposed to eat? Because you're also telling me that apples that aren't organic are bad for me. And it's just, again, it comes back down to like, people are blinded by their own privilege to the point where they are like actually making it really shameful for people to just do something as simple as eating.
Yeah.
I know I just went off on like a tangent. I apologize.
No, that's super important. Yeah, that's super important. Like, I've even heard like, and I've argued with people about this, about whether fruit is good or bad because of the sugar content. And it's like, it's fruit.
Yes.
You know, but that's a good point. It's like, at the end of the day, what's going to keep you alive versus not is getting enough calories so that your body can continue to sustain itself. And this idea that like, oh, well, we only get the organic grass-fed beef because blah, blah, blah. You know, it's like, if you have the means to do that, amazing. It's probably a more like beneficial option for the earth or whatever. So if you can put your money towards that, great. But paying attention to what people really have access to and what's reasonable in someone's budget is so important.
Absolutely. And also too, like, just to be like clear, it's also like, even if you have the means to buy that type of stuff, you know, when I was starting recovery, so when I relapsed in 2017, I lived in Reading. And so that community, as we know, is very, very health conscious. Right. And I was a part of that community. So I had a lot of my identity like wrapped up in how I ate. And so for me, as I was going on this journey, I would always like, let's say I'm having friends over for dinner, let's make banana ice cream, you know, and it was like, this is the healthy version of ice cream. And we're all like sitting there sad eating our banana ice cream. But we convinced ourselves we loved it. But for me, and like, I actually don't hate banana ice cream. Like it has its like, purpose, you know? It does. But I wasn't eating it because I enjoyed it. I was eating it because I was afraid to eat actual ice cream. And so as I was going on my recovery journey, the healthiest option for me, and I don't say that ironically, the healthiest option for me was to have a big old bowl of real fatty, sugary, delicious ice cream, because my mental health was suffering while I was eating the banana ice cream. I was like literally having physical reactions. My cortisol, as I'm trying to obsess over eating healthy, my cortisol is all out of balance. I'm stressing myself out all the time. I'm overworking myself at the gym to try to work it all off. And I think people have to realize, like, again, we just don't have any business talking about what other people are choosing to do. So if the healthiest option for you at a restaurant is maybe ordering a grilled chicken salad because that's truly what you want and that's really what's going to make you feel good, that's great. But you might be meeting up with somebody who the healthiest choice for them to make is to get the double cheeseburger with the onion rings, you know, because they're fighting for their health. They're fighting to get their recovery. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't always take into consideration when they want to make judgments based off what other people are choosing to eat.
Yeah, actually, one thing I really appreciated, there's a like a bodybuilder that I follow. Her name's Steffi Cohen, and she did like a whole bit where she ate like a McDonald's cheeseburger on camera.
I love it.
And just sort of talked about like the balance of life, right? Like, your body ultimately needs nutrients and calories, and you know, in whatever way that you have to get that, you can get that. And if you eat a cheeseburger however often you need to sustain yourself, like the point is that you are you know, doing the best you can.
And I mean, and I think in a similar vein, like I love seeing people like Lizzo, who's vegan, showing herself eating, and she's like, I'm vegan and I'm fat, and this is what it looks like to like I am taking care of my body in all the ways that I know how. Obviously, Lizzo being a millionaire or whatever, like she has access to anything that she could want when it comes to food. But it's great seeing someone like her when like the idea of being vegan is stereotyped as you must look a certain way. As someone who is vegan, I like definitely hear that a lot, or where people are like, there's a ton of stereotypes we could go down. We don't have to right now.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of like misnomers about that. And there's multiple people that I follow who are vegan and who don't look the way that you would expect someone who's vegan to look. Because again, as we've been talking about, like health looks different on different people. Everybody's body is going to process food and represent itself differently. And that's not necessarily a signifier of how healthy they are.
Right. Well, and like she's an athlete. Like look at the shows that she puts on, you know, like those are cardio workouts in and of themselves.
I can't twerk like that. That takes muscles.
It does. And I know like she does exercise from, you know, what I see like on TikTok and stuff. And it's like, if she was a thin person, people would be all about her lifestyle. But people, you know, it just comes back down to, well, do you want people to be healthy or you just don't want them to be fat? you know, like let's just get real honest with ourselves.
And I think that's like ultimately the question about it, and super important to be considering. I know there's tons of things that I am unlearning and like assumptions that I have to get rid of about things just that I've grown up with implicitly in our culture and in my family and in school and whatever. And so, really appreciate you taking the time to come on and share all of these beautiful insights. And before we close, I wanted to ask our final question, which is a question we ask all of our guests, and it's open to interpretation. And I'm so excited to hear your take on this. And that is, what does the phrase woman being mean to you?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this since we last talked. And I think, to be completely transparent and honest, I'm still learning. And what I mean by that is I'm in this journey in this season right now where I feel like I am just tearing back every layer of like identity, every layer of my personality, even the dreams that I've always had, just the way I've presented myself to the world, and getting to the root of who is Rihanna? Who was she when she was born as a 7-pound, 10-ounce baby, you know? And for me, I'm learning, I'm never going to have a clear answer. You know, I think being a woman being is fully embracing where you are at in that moment, in that season in your life, because I'm not the same person that I was 10 years ago. And I hope I'm not going to be the same person 10 years from now. But I do hope that I have some sort of connection to myself, and that whoever it is that I decide to become is being authentic to that little baby inside, honestly. And it's been just so freeing to realize that like, we don't have to like limit ourselves into one. Like, we're so obsessed with like wanting to describe ourselves, right? Like, I'm an Enneagram 3 and I am an ENFJ. And it's like, these are the things that make me. But it really, and those are great tools, I think, but it's really freeing to just embrace that. It's like, yeah, I'm who I am right now. And I hope life changes me, because what's the point of living if you're not going to change and grow?
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah, that's
actually, it ties into, I was reflecting this morning for whatever reason on woman being. And I thought, I had the thought of like woman becoming. And I thought about how easy it would be to launch a whole brand called Woman Becoming.
Gosh.
And to like encourage women to like reach for the next thing and who they can be and all the like the big dreams and the aspirations and sort of that like classic motivational speaker talk. But the value of woman being as it is that the only time that we actually have control over, the only time that we actually get to be present in is now. And us being is that process of changing from who we were into who we will become. But if we don't acknowledge and accept the being part of it, we'll be lost in the future that we've not yet achieved, or we'll be stuck in the past that is behind us. And so I heard a lot of that in what you just said, and I think that's so valuable, is just I can't accept who I will become. I can only accept the me that is now.
Right.
And that's amazing.
Yeah.
So I got like goosebumps. But As we close, I wanted to give you an opportunity to share resources with us. I know you've already shared a couple of your favorites, but any other books, podcasts, movies that people should listen to if they want to explore this topic more?
So, well, I'll just like toot my own horn. I do have a book.
Yes.
It's an ebook. It is like a 10-day interactive journey. It's called How to Break Up with Diet Culture, that walks you through what I hope to be practical steps to start you on the process of healing your relationship with food and your body. You're not going to get there after 10 days, but hopefully it will help set like a foundation for you to just continue to grow and build upon. And you can find that I actually have it on my Etsy store, which makes me cringe a little bit, the fact that I have an Etsy, but it just works for me. So, but also, a book that I would recommend is Intuitive Eating by Evelyn Tribole, I believe. And it is truly just dives into the deeper meaning as to why we eat the way that we do, uncovering like what your tendencies are with food and learning how to reevaluate and heal that relationship. Yeah. And then I would probably also recommend truly following a variety of different influencers on social media. Some of my favorites that I like to learn from are Saucy West. She has a whole campaign on wanting to have diverse clothing options for plus size women. I would also recommend The Black Nutritionist, because she does such great work diving into really exposing the racist roots of diet culture and how diet culture has a tendency to demonize certain ethnic foods until they realize that they can make a buck off of it. And then they rebrand it and whitewash it and then sell it at Whole Foods for, $20.99. So that's The Black Nutritionist. And then I would also recommend, Hey Tiffany Rowe is her Instagram account. And she is a recovered therapist. So she had an eating disorder of her own, and she posts a variety of things. She does dive into deconstructing religion. She used to be Mormon. She dives into deconstructing diet culture and deconstructing sexuality, all of the things that a lot of people are dealing with right now.
Oh, that's great. I cannot wait to share those.
There's so many more. I'll email you guys some more recommendations. But truly, like, there's just so many great creators out there to learn from.
Great. And we will include those in our episode bios, as we always do. So, and then lastly, how can the people find you? We talked about your book, but you also have an Insta account. You also have a podcast.
I do. So I am on Instagram at The Fight for Beauty. I am on TikTok with the same handle. And I'm on Twitter, but Twitter is, I just kind of use it to vent about random things that people don't want to hear about. And then, I also have my podcast. My podcast is the I Have a Question podcast. It's kind of it's a little different than my Instagram account. I just wanted the opportunity to talk to a variety of different people that may not necessarily be in like the eating disorder recovery, food, body image issues realm. But I do still interview some people like that. But you can find the Instagram account. It's at ihaveaquestion.pod. And you can also find me on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
Amazing. Well, I cannot wait to dive into some of those resources and for all the people to find you.
Yeah, come find me. Come stalk me. I love stalkers.
Have a conversation with Rihanna. She has so much wisdom. Yeah, I feel like we've been talking for so long, but I feel like there's so much more that we could still talk about. So, but alas, we try to keep our podcasts relatively not overly long. So
it's like,
well, you girls are so easy to talk to as well. Like, thank you so much for like having me come on. And like, I mean that, like, I don't feel like I had to like, I don't know, strive or perform. I hate those religious buzzwords, but it's true. You guys are so easy to talk to. I love what you guys are doing. It's great.
Thank you so much. That is so sweet. And we have likewise appreciated our conversation with you. And I'm not just saying that. And so, with all that being said, woman beings, thank you so much for listening to this episode. We also want you to find us on Instagram, and that handle is at Woman Being Podcast. We, as you know, because you're listening to our podcast, are on all sorts of podcast platforms. You can find us on Stitcher, on YouTube, on, oh my gosh, Apple Podcast, Spotify, you name it. So if you are listening to this on a platform you don't prefer, you can find us somewhere else for sure.
Yeah.
Please leave us a review. We want you to know how you felt about this episode. And most importantly, we love when you interact. There's so many episodes that we've done this season that have been because of you recommending a person we should talk to or recommending a topic we should talk about. So that interaction has been so crucial in how we form the podcast and the types of things we're talking about. And we love it as well. So all that being said, we're going to wrap this up and wish you all a happy summer.